Yes. Good evening, friends. Since there is an emergency and the requirement as per the calendar of events, I'm here with uh, trying to submit and complete that task. And in pursuance with it, left with no option, I'm conducting this session online because in the morning and all we are busy with NAC work. So the topic which I'm going to discuss is biodiversity, United Nations, and Indian response. And if we refer to our culture has got already an acquaintance, affiliation, a compassion, and a kind of close relationship with all the animals, leaves, flowers, fruits, everything. And if we see our national animal, national birds, and national trees, so it is nothing but the natural, the biodiversity itself is our the respective things, the national animal, etc. And that is how we have already established ourselves that we are in close association with the biodiversity. So this is this attachment which we are having at the national level, and this attachment with animals we are having at the state level. And then coming to the concept of biodiversity, there is a proposition from Mahatma Gandhi with reference to the utilization of biodiversity by the human being. He mentioned that nature has provided everything for the need of the man, but not for the greed of the man. So at that time itself, he could. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, but you are audible.
Okay, okay. The screen is visible now?
Screen, no, madam. It is not visible.
Screen gone again. Mahatma Gandhi could able to visualize that unless and until man controls his passion for utilization of the natural resources, it will be a kind of tough task. So that is what he mentioned like. And the United Nations has responded to the biodiversity and its importance and significance in the life of a human being, mentioning that. So please try to think globally, act locally, and change personally. So unless and until our perception to the biodiversity got adjusted with reference to the concept and the nature and scope of the biodiversity, we may not be able to survive with the suitable and appropriate biodiversity that is required for the human being. And then coming to the introduction part of this topic, I don't think that the introduction is required because all of us are experts. So far as teaching this thing is concerned, and as such, I am of the opinion that we are all having the basic knowledge about the biodiversity. That is why I'm trying to just move ahead a little bit faster. And biodiversity is concerned in our constitution with the help of Article 39B and C, because the material resources that are reflected in the Indian Constitution through Article 39B and C are nothing but with reference to the natural resources. That is what the judiciary has expressed, and it is the words of the Justice V.R. Krishna here referring to the material resources, stating that they are the national wealth. So when they happen to be the national wealth, we are expected to protect them, take care of them. Then coming to the specific mandate that is given by the Indian Constitution with reference to biodiversity is that Article 48A, which got incorporated through 42nd Amendment, and Article 51G, which is also incorporated through 42nd Amendment, are read through Article 21. And you know the sequence of judgments right from 1980 till 1990 or 1995, right from the Andhra Pradesh High Court judgments to Supreme Court judgments, they were all in consonance with the right to wholesome environment. And then coming to Article 51C and 253, which were reflected in various judgments like Narmada Bachao Andolan, etc. They are they have clarified the fact that the judiciary has got every responsibility in addition to the executive and the legislature to see that the wholesome environment is taken care of. And though these international conventions have not been incorporated into Indian legislation by virtue of a formal compliance as under Article 253, still they are required to be taken care of. That is what the doctrine of intergenerational equity, doctrine of sustainable development, and the polluter pays principle, precautionary pays principle, etc. All these principles have been incorporated in Indian environmental jurisprudence, but for the sake of protecting the biodiversity. Then coming to, you know very well, how the ecosystem got interconnected with each other, and how this ecosystem could able to have some kind of inter-responsibility with each other, and how the human being is a consumer. You all aware of, and as such, just I'm trying to skip and continue the same. Then here in this particular discussion, we are going to identify what is biodiversity, what is the technical importance that is given to the biodiversity at the international level, and how many kinds of biodiversity are there, definition of biodiversity, importance, then intrinsic value, and what are the threats that the biodiversity is facing, and what the international law is speaking on biodiversity, and what Indian law is speaking about the biodiversity. And we have the ancient Indian approach to biodiversity, and thereby at the end we will go through conclusions, suggestions, etc. Now let me take you to the what is biodiversity. Yeah, what is biodiversity? Is nothing but life supported on planet Earth. So you know very well, without oxygen, without water, we cannot survive. Then let me take you to the technical definition part. And the types of biodiversity: genetic diversity, species diversity, ecological biodiversity, and functional biodiversity. Then coming to the definition that is given under the Biodiversity Act 2002. And the red part, the words which are colored with red color are the definitions which were there in Convention of the Biodiversity, but which we have not included. Sorry, which we have included in our national legislation. So the international components on biodiversity got included into Indian law. And in addition to those components, we had these the other specifications which are colored in the white color. The variability among all living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystem. So not only the items which are living on our planet Earth, but we are also including the marine biodiversity and other aquatic ecosystems. And not only that, ecological complexes of which they are a part. And this and includes diversity. So interrelationship between all these items connected with each other directly or indirectly. If you take, for example, plant has got connection with water, plant has got connection with air, plant has got connection with earth. So because of that reason, this definition has been taken care with reference to the all functions and the basic components which fall under the category of the biodiversity. And the importance of biodiversity, you all know. As such, I'm just moving ahead. Then what is the intrinsic value of the biodiversity? It has got an ecological importance, genetic importance, social importance, economic, scientific, educational, cultural, recreational, aesthetic. So aesthetic value, you know very well. When you see a beautiful flower, when you see a small puppy, you will feel comfortable. You will get rid of all the tensions and all. The reason being, it carries the aesthetic value. It carries the ecological value. How? So every item in the nature are depending on each other, and they are able to survive. For example, we have discussed in the ecosystem basic concept where the producers are there on which the The consumers are depending. Unless the producers, trees are producing the food, the consumers are not able to survive on this earth. So like that, the biodiversity has got all these values which we have to remember while we are interacting with the biodiversity. Then these are all the threats you know very well. I need not explain you much. And then coming to the International Law on Biodiversity. These are all the conventions which are connected to biodiversity. Let me just briefly explain you. Stockholm Declaration is that declaration after the Rio Ramsar Convention 1971. So this is the first convention at the international level which takes care of wetlands. And thereafter we had 26 principles under Stockholm Declaration which takes care of wholesome environment. Then coming to the celebration which took place in 1982, come out with certain conventions which are indirectly connected to biodiversity, and directly we had a Rio Declaration wherein Biodiversity Convention got entered into. That is what? 1992 Convention on BD. Rio Declaration contains 5 conventions. Then coming to Cartagena Protocol, then COP11 Hyderabad in 2012, we had COP is nothing but Conference of Parties. 11th Conference of Parties got conducted in Hyderabad. Then Sustainable Development 2002 and Nagoya Protocol 2010. And still there is a progression. Every 10 years, the Biodiversity Conference of Parties is taking place and it is trying to upgrade its commitment as it has undertaken in the Stockholm Declaration. And what the Stockholm Declaration is prescribing for taking care of biodiversity, individually everybody is responsible. For what? For careful planning as to how he is using biodiversity, for maintenance of the biodiversity, for safeguarding the biodiversity, for wise employment of the natural resources. And every individual is required with a duty to stop pollution and heat release, etc., etc. This is individual responsibility that is being prescribed in the Stockholm Declaration. But how far we are undertaking this responsibility, we should identify. And then coming to the responsibility of the state. So state has got the responsibility that it should not facilitate sea pollution. It should not see that the living environment on the planet Earth is disturbed. Then sustainable development only it should carry out. Sustainable consumption only it should carry out. Planning for human settlement, population control, then establishing national institutes, adoption of science and technology, fixing liabilities. So here only the issue comes. If we discuss about the Nuclear Liability Act 2010, so there is a lot of variation. So here it says that biodiversity law, international convention, Indian law says that we have to fix the liability. But when it is coming to Nuclear Liability 2010, state limits the liability of the providers of the respective components of the nuclear power generation. So this is a kind of certain one incident where we are having a double standard. We are not fixing the liability on the concerned the stakeholders. Then coming to value system, then hazardous activities. So you know very well post-COVID there was an incident, and this is the state responsibility which has to prevent. State would have come out with a standard operating procedure for all these companies to open after the lockdown which we got imposed to prevent the spreading of the COVID. But state also failed to do so, and we have witnessed that incident in Vizag. Then coming to Rio Declaration, so global partnership is being encouraged, and global environment is to come together. We have to verify whether each generation is able to get the natural resources for their utility and whether the precautionary principle is taken care of. So if we see Water and Air Act and the Environment Protection Act, so how these principles are being taken care of, and how the women and youth are being involved, and how they are interacting with reference to the biodiversity. So we will be identifying that still a lot is to be undertaken. Then coming to Convention on BD, it takes care of conservation. It would like to minimize the threat to biodiversity, and public should be educated. And in fact, you know very well, according to the biodiversity legislation in India, we have constituted biodiversity committees at the village level, and without whose consent, no single leaf or the flower of the particular village shall be taken away from the village. But still, you know very well, the villagers are not having the proper knowledge, and their natural resources are being exploited. And there is a link. In fact, this village committee has to report the same to the National Biodiversity Authority, and National Biodiversity Authority, without consultation with the Village Biodiversity Board, they cannot grant the sanction of utilization of any of the biodiversity of that particular village. So far as Ramsar Convention, it takes care of wetland protection. Coming to Cartagena Protocol, takes care of precautionary approach on biodiversity. Then Advanced Inform Agreement. Then control of LMO. So this Advanced Inform Agreement is nothing but, sir, Advanced Informed Agreement is nothing but beforehand only. We will intimate that on account of the utilization of so and so biodiversity, so and so consequence is going to happen. So we should have a prior understanding as to what kind of impact we are going to have. Then, sir, would you like to say something? Okay. Yeah. So then control of LMO, living modified objects. So these living modified objects are to be taken care of. Of course, we have seen how certain countries have responded, reacted to these LMOs. When we were trying to have some kind of understanding in the Hyderabad Conference of Parties, certain countries have rejected themselves to take up this particular agenda in the Hyderabad COP. And there are some politics that are taking place, and we are unable to have a kind of strong, of course, but there is a trial that is taking place at the international level. Then coming to COP 11, what was the developments? Double funding from developed countries, then sustainable management of oceans, to factor BD into EIA, then BD to be realized, not to be solved, then green economy and national strategies. So these are the major developments that took place in Hyderabad Conference of Parties connected to biodiversity. Then with reference to sustainable development, they were saying that the corporate must be held responsible because corporates are considered to be the one who is impacting the biodiversity more. Then Nagoya Protocol takes care of the conservation through providing the incentives, and it says that priority for traditional knowledge. But you know very well under IPR how this traditional knowledge is being manipulated, and it is interconnected with biodiversity, but still the traditional knowledge is required to have more amount of protection. Then prior informed consent for access, then research is to be encouraged. Food security also should be extended to, and the national focal points are to be with reference to the identification, how much resource we are having, what are the precautionary measures we have to take. So like this, every protocol takes care of the biodiversity, post-biodiversity convention. Then coming to India, in India, we have Biological Diversity Act 2002 and the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers Act 2002 also is in consonance with BD Act. Then we have Plant Quarantine Regulation of Import into India Order 2003. We have Food Safety and Standards Act 2006. We have Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act 2006, then 1986 Environment Protection Act, Forest Conservation Act 1980, and then Patents Act 1970, then Seeds Act 1966, Destructive Insects and Pests Act 1914, and Wildlife Protection Act 1972. And thereafter we have the rules for manufacture, use, import, export, etc. of hazardous microorganisms like COVID, corona, etc., etc. So these are all the legislations which are supporting each other supplemental to each other, coordinating with each other, and they are trying their level best to protect the environment in India, that is biodiversity in India. But how far we are able to achieve? We have number of legislations. So as a teacher, we will be discussing in the classroom stating that this law is there, this provision is there, these are the conditions with which the particular provision imposes the liability. But coming to the result part is concerned, to what extent we are able to protect this biodiversity with the help of the legislation. So here we have the salient features, the scheme, the objective, exemptions, everything. So let me take you to the salient features. So salient features are, we would like to regulate the access to BD. We don't want the biodiversity to be used by one set of people who have got a rich resources to exploit the same. So rather we want to see that everybody, as per the requirement, is making use of the respective thing. And not only that, the knowledge that is associated to have the utilization of the biological resources is also extended with a due protection in the name of traditional knowledge. Then coming to conservation and sustainable use. So if we are excessively using, that is why you might have heard of, you can refresh your memory, the sand which is on the seashore and the river shore is not being permitted to be used exhaustively. So there is a limit per month, only this much you can use. So while the licenses are being granted, there will be a control over the same. Then respect and protect traditional knowledge. Then sharing of benefits among benefit claimers. Who are the benefit claimers? Benefit claimers are none other than the people who use the respective biodiversity and thereby earn the profits out of the same. So to what extent they will be permitted? Protection of BHS. BHS is nothing but biodiversity hotspot. What is biodiversity hotspot? For example, forest is there. So in forest, you have not only the plants, you have the animals, everything. So everything is to be taken care of. Then coming to protection and rehabilitation of threatened species. So you know very well, we have so many species who are facing the threat of extinction. So this biodiversity legislation along with Wildlife Protection Act, both together are providing for maintenance of the stud books, and these stud books shall have the record of all the plant species or animal species which are about to extinct, and thereby we have to have a specific protection mechanism to protect the respective biodiversity. Then local bodies' role in decision making. So village committee, biodiversity committee has been given a top priority, without whose consent we cannot use such biodiversity. National Biodiversity Authority is also required to contact the concerned village committee only, BMC, biomanagement committees at the village level. But how far village biodiversity management committees are educated in this context? That is the crucial aspect here. National Biodiversity Authority is there, State Biodiversity Authority is there, BMC is there, but how far these BMCs are having education with reference to this BD Act? Unless and until they are educated, I don't think we are able to achieve the implementation of this legislation to its objective. And coming to biodiversity, so we are going ahead with conservation and we are going ahead with sustainable use. So these are the two kinds of interactions which we are having with biodiversity. And with reference to conservation, you see no specific strategy. But with reference to sustainable use of the biodiversity, we have a big strategy. One is, we say that biological resources and associated knowledge. And these two, what we are doing, how, for what purposes we are using? For 4 purposes we are using. One is commercial purpose, another one is research, third one is biosurvey, and for bioutilization. So for these four purposes, we will be using both of them, biological resources as well as knowledge. Then how these four things are being used through a framework. So in this framework, what kind of things we have permitted? Access to biological resources, then sharing the benefits arising out of such access. For example, I am taking one biological resource and I am getting the benefits out of it, commercially exploiting. What I should do, I should share my commercial benefits, which I am acquiring out of the biodiversity, to all those people whose traditional knowledge I use, whose biological resource I use, whose in the sense, in the respective region. In that region, I have to share these things. Then how my utilization and my sharing will be taken care of. It is regulated through a governing mechanism. How transfer of research results, and then the application for IPR relating to Indian biological resources. So this is how the governing of the utilization of the biological resources and associated knowledge is being prescribed under the BD Act. Then coming to what are the basic objectives, we have already discussed: sustainable use, conservation, and fair and equitable sharing. Then coming to conservation, what are the various things which are taken care of? So regulation of access is controlled. Transfer of results of research controlled through this provision. Promote research, Section 5 takes care of. Regulation of patenting, Section 6 takes care of. Patenting of natural resources which are identified as biodiversity. Then prior intimation, without which they can't do. It is BR means bioregister. Every BMC, biodiversity management committee, has to maintain a bioregister. That bioregister shall contain the list of the biological resources that are available in the given village. Then EBS, equal benefit sharing, that is to be identified, how they are sharing. Then expert advice, regulation of consumption, sustainable management, heritage sites, notifying threatened species and repositories. So the biodiversity, in fact, if we look into the legislation, every minute aspect, that is the reason it has taken almost all 10 years to draft a legislation in India post Biodiversity Convention. Convention got agreed in 1992, but we took 10 years to draft a legislation because we should take care of our cultural perspective also with reference to biodiversity, because you know very well we are culturally attached with the biodiversity, and our lifestyle itself is totally connected with biodiversity, wherein in the morning early we offer sun god, and we take tulasi, we give water to tulasi, we consume tulasi for medicinal purposes like sore throat, etc., etc. So because of all these association of Indians with the biodiversity, they were forced to take a much more caution while enacting a legislation. Otherwise, foreign community, foreigners or foreign nationals may come to India and start claiming the biodiversity, since we had signed the Biodiversity Convention. Then coming to sustainable use, how it is regulated, how fair and equitable sharing has been specified in the respective legislation. So since time is not permitting me, I'm trying to push through the respective aspects. Since you are all aware of, the only thing is that I'm just trying to refresh your memory. Then coming to access and benefit sharing, these are the concerns which have been kept in the Indian biodiversity legislation, where human genetic material is exempted from, not to be given under access and benefit sharing. That means we can't take our human egg or something like that, or genetic, and thereby go on having a research and then produce a human being. So all those things we have prevented in granting an exemption. Then coming to, we have these many authorities: NBA, SPB, BMC, Biodiversity Management Committee at the village level. Then we have expert group, and central government and state government and National Green Tribunal will be taking care of. Then coming to functions of authorities. So we have various categories of functions: facilitative, regulatory, advisory, responsible, monitoring, and technically supportive functions. And then coming to benefit claimers. Who are the benefit claimers? The one who is conserving the biodiversity resources. For example, if we go to the villages, they do take care of their biodiversity by planting them consistently, by watering them, by continuous to hold the knowledge pertaining to that biodiversity, and then share that knowledge from one generation to another generation. So grandparents convey the same. So we have seen so many snake medicine, etc., etc. How this kind of knowledge has been moving from one generation to another generation. So these are all considered to be the benefit claimers. So whoever taken care of biodiversity, they should be given a share. But how far we are giving the share, we know very well. So this is public biodiversity register, which is expected to have the data of the entire biodiversity that is available in the given region. So we need to invite, in fact, biodiversity board experts and get an updated knowledge as to how this biodiversity is in real time being managed by them or taken care of by them. If we come to the biodiversity heritage sites in the state of AP, we are having Kondakatla Ava, which is connected to the migratory birds located in Visakhapatnam district, is identified as biodiversity heritage sites. So like that, we have a list of areas which are having even, if you see, Acharya NG Ranga Agricultural University, Rajendra Nagar. It's a biodiversity area connected to the forest. Then coming to Vijayanagaram, Tadipatti Reservoir, Tatipudi Reservoir. So this is connected to fish food birds. So a kind of birds. So like that, Srikakulam, migratory birds. Then coming to repositories. So these organizations by name, Botanical Survey of India, National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, Botanical Research Institute and Indian Council Forest Research, etc., Geological Survey of India. These are all the repositories who maintain the genetic resource, and in case of any requirement, they do have a kind of verification whether this is pertaining to so and so genetic composition or not. If there is any manipulation, we will identify through our research, and these are the repositories who are going to have the deposit of all the genetic compositions of the various sources. For example, if you take National Bureau, plant genetic resources are available with them. Then coming to penalties for commission or abatement of the violation of the provisions under Biodiversity Act. These offences are cognizable offences, they are non-bailable offences. So these are all the punishments which are imposed. So up to 3 years punishment. So here also up to 3 years punishment, obtaining biodiversity without prior intimation. Then all other violations up to 2 lakhs rupees punishment. So, but we are seeing very scarce punishment under this biodiversity. That means we have to have much more awareness with reference to. Then what are the strengths that are required? Still, Biodiversity Act had to achieve a lot of strength. Otherwise, we are not in a position to conserve our biodiversity. So it has to have a supremacy to be given to the biodiversity, and we have to have a coordination between all the concerned authorities, and there shall be a strict compliance of these legislations. Then only various components like welfare bodies to be given a lot of strength, and all these things are to be undertaken. Then only really we are in a position to achieve. Then coming to some of the projects which State Biodiversity Board is taking care of, these are all the projects which they are trying to see that biodiversity is taken care of. If we see in ancient Indian approach to environment, every Veda, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Manusmriti, Matsya Purana, whatnot, there are so much of a literature that is available where it is said that taking care of the environment itself is going to give a lot of energy to us. If you see the Indian culture, panchayat system, they used to sit under the tree. So if we see Vastu system, it is nothing but a cultural perspective which we have given. So my sincere appeal to all the participants of this program is to see that we have to protect the biodiversity, which is already being taught to us in a various stories which we have heard of. This is a greed breeds sorrow, golden egg of a duck you might have heard of. So this is nothing but the lesson we need to learn. If we cut the plant, what happens? So what Einstein mentioned, to sustain human race, we need to change our attitude absolutely. So we want the same or not. If you see the story of Tenali Ramakrishna, so it is also giving us a lot of clarity that we have to conserve the environment. So now I request all of us to take a pledge for life.